Hello everyone, welcome to my latest vlog. As you can see, I'm back at home base in Ottawa, Canada now. I was in Pakistan for the last few weeks visiting my family, and on the way back from Pakistan to Canada, I stopped in Doha, Qatar for 2 days to attend the Humanitarian Leadership Conference that was organized by the Center for Humanitarian Leadership in Australia and the Center for Conflict and Humanitarian Studies in Doha, Qatar. It was a really interesting 2 days. There were hundreds of us there, humanitarians, practitioners, academics, INGOs from all over the world. And it was really, really interesting to meet a number of people who I knew from before but had never met, and to meet new people, particularly those from a number of global south countries who work in humanitarianism at the grassroots. I think that was really fantastic to see. I also had the opportunity to speak briefly at the conference and to moderate a panel. A number of you have been providing your reflections on LinkedIn about the conference, and I'd like to provide some of my reflections as well in this vlog. And I will be reading from a script today because there's just so much to cover. I don't want to lose on my train of thought. So, first of all, the title of the conference was Humanitarian Leadership in a Time of Polycrisis. And polycrisis is a word that we've been hearing for the last 3 months in particular, very frequently. But I think it's not a new word. The world has been in polycrises for a number of decades. Countries individually have been facing crisis after crisis. So for a lot of us, it's not a time of polycrisis. That has always been the case. I think now it's just more prominent because there seems to be no money for it. Let's put it that way. I'd like to break down the theme of the conference, which talked about humanitarian leadership, and I'd like to talk about humanitarianism and leadership. Let's start with leadership. So, leadership for me isn't about necessarily about just people, which is how we tend to make it, particularly in the humanitarian aid industry. I think it's not even about community leaders. And again, that's something that we tend to romanticize and put up high on a pedestal a lot. I don't deny their importance, but I think leadership isn't about people. I think leadership is about ensuring that we have a system that is strong enough to withstand any sort of crisis. I think that's true leadership. It doesn't come from individuals necessarily, it comes from a system being strong enough to withstand. An example of that is the current funding crisis that we're going through. We know that the foreign aid system was completely flawed as a system because it has not been able to withstand the crisis that it's currently going through. Leadership is also not about CEOs. And I bring that up because that word was also very prominent at the conference, and there were a number of people there who were CEOs of organizations, be they humanitarian aid organization or NGOs. And I think that is important to talk about because does it reflect the current situation where we're constantly talking about locally led leadership? And we're talking about those at the bottom must be able to lead. So the idea of CEOs of global INGOs being at the top and also being seen as leaders is something that I think contradicts, particularly since there were questions about whether or not this leadership would step back and allow others to come into the fray. I think that question remained unanswered, and I think it always will. So that was something that struck me. Related to that was the idea of billionaire philanthropy. So, this is what set the tone for the conference. The very first plenary on the first day was on billionaire philanthropy and represented by a number of global, white, particularly American, male led billionaire philanthropist organizations. And I think for those who have never even stepped into the shadow of poverty and have been driven by market and political interests, I find it hard to believe that they would lead the charge for philanthropy. I don't think they do, and I think that's a very dangerous precedent that we are setting, and we need to move away from that. And we need to question that form of philanthropy. So that was something that struck me a lot at the conference. That's not the direction that we need to be going in. Then let's move towards humanitarianism. That word itself, humanitarianism, has become so contested simply because we've included it in the vocabulary of global foreign aid in terms of humanitarian aid. I think that is a major flaw in the humanitarian system, that it is an industry. And I've always said that we have always had humanitarians within each of our own countries for decades and millennia. I don't think any country has not, does not have its own humanitarian. And I don't want to use the word local humanitarianism or local first responders. These are just literally citizens of a country, be there individuals who will walk into a collapsed building to try and save people, or those who are walking by and witness a catastrophe happening and jump in to save, or whether these are people who truly believe in humans and the nature of humanitarianism and have selflessly devoted their lives to the people of their country. I have many examples in Pakistan that I've mentioned before. In fact, in Pakistan, we even have a term in Urdu for the word humanitarianism, and that's falahi karkun. So that ethos of humanitarianism exists everywhere in the world, and we've made it our own. The problem here is that it is a northern formalization of humanitarianism that has led us to the crisis that we're in, because that has ultimately taken control of something that is inherently human, and it's taken the human out of humanitarianism and it's turned it into an industry based on control and based on money, and that's it, right? And so we've taken the human out of humanitarianism in this industry. And this formalization, whether it is the United Nations agencies, whether it's the Red Cross, whether it's INGOs, we've made this into a bureaucratic exercise. And people spoke about bureaucracy at the conference, right? I mean, there was a talk of change. Why don't INGOs change? And the answer was that, they are up against a massive global bureaucracy of their own organizations. And that itself is such a contradiction in terms. Because humanitarianism, I mean, bureaucracy is the last thing that you think of when you think of humanitarianism, right? So that's something else that I think we need to focus on when we talk about taking back space and leading the charge ourselves in humanitarian causes and catastrophe. There were many at the conference who were asking why the world has forgotten about them. And for me, Sudan stood out the most. There were a number of Sudanese there who worked in the grassroots with organizations. They were members of the emergency response, DRR, the emergency response room. That's something that Sudan has pioneered during the war. And each of them was crying out loud, why has the world forgotten about Sudan, which is one of the largest catastrophes by sheer number in the world. It even overtakes Gaza. Why has the world forgotten about us? And I don't think anybody had an answer to that. And that's something that we really need to give an answer to. Why we as international industrial humanitarians have forgotten about one of the largest and worst catastrophes in the world. So much so that we have people from their country coming and crying and asking, why? Do you want us to plead our case to you? Is that not enough for you? There's something that's wrong about that, right? Myanmar was on top of mind on everybody because of the recent earthquake that occurred there. There was a representative there from Myanmar, from a community organization from Myanmar, who spoke about how we need to be very, very cautious about the political situation in Myanmar and not take anything that is said there for granted. This is a closed, isolated world that we're talking about there. Yet I see and read a lot of online comments from the humanitarian industry saying that this is an opportunity for us to focus on local responders and locally led development. But focus exactly how? When you're still in charge, how do you want that to happen? And how do you want that to happen in one of the most closed societies of the world? What are you going to do? And is this actually the time to experiment? That's a question we need to have. We shouldn't. This is not about experimentation. This is about what exists and letting it exist, right? There were calls, likewise, for a lot of the industry leaders to step back and to give space, right? And it was space to locally led humanitarians and leaders. But we also have to question that exactly what sort of space are we asking for? What sort of space are they asking for? And does that space actually exist? Because there are a lot of countries in the world that still do need assistance globally. They can't do it on their own. But then what sort of space are we talking about giving up to them? And what sort of space do we want to keep amongst ourselves? I think that's, again, no answers to that came up during the conference, but I think these questions came up. Another issue that came up was positioning for influence. But whose influence are we talking about here? How will that influence be used? Will it be used? Will it be global South influence or global North influence? Right? Both of them want their own influence. Um, we know, in fact, that a lot of organizations, northern organizations, are not going anywhere. There wasn't a clear answer as to how long are you going to be in charge. The response came that it's really slow going, and we can't afford slow going right now. We know billionaire philanthropy is not going anywhere, but that's why we need to be doubly cautious about it, because it's not going in a direction that it really should be going in, right? So, where do we stand on humanitarianism and leadership in a time of polycrisis, as the conference theme were? I mean, there were countless examples of community organizations at the conference, represented at the conference, who showed that communities, whether they're individuals or whether they're organizations, formal organizations, or whether they're governments, are actually responding as best as they can. And we need to focus on that, but we need to focus on how to allow that to evolve as naturally as possible, instead of saying, okay, we will also control this focus. We will also decide where and what sort of support is needed for local first responders and community organizations to take control. We can't think that way. We have to let things evolve organically and naturally. And by not letting go, we're not letting that happen at all. The one thing I'd really like to highlight here is that we can't also romanticize local. We can't. We shouldn't. People on the ground, their reality is very different from ours, and it will continue to be. They will always need support. We just have to make sure that the support that we're giving them is not taking over them and not overwhelming them. It's giving them the opportunity to develop themselves and their own ways of support, that we can't be in control of that. And so we've got to look at everything in its context. But by and large, I think what we really need to focus on is this northern-led humanitarian industrial complex that should have been a system that was strong enough to withstand any sort of crisis. That's what it constantly claimed. But we've seen that it is unable to now. And it's trying to find reasons to stay relevant. Yet it's not able to explain why it still can't handle all the crises around the world. I mean, everybody keeps saying it's money. We don't have enough money. It's not the point. It's not money. It's exactly how you're approaching humanitarianism. And I'll say again, we've taken the human out of it, and we've turned it into an industry. And that's where the problem lies. So moving forward, let's try and dismantle this industry and not create a parallel industry in countries as well of the South, which is why I say again, let's not romanticize local communities and local first responders. Let's look at the good that they're doing, and let's work with that good. We have countless examples of that all over the world. So I will end there. And again, more questions than answers. But I guess that's what gatherings like this are there for, that at least the questions should get asked, if they're not necessarily answered. So thank you all for listening, and do subscribe and tune in to my next vlog in another week or so. Take care, everyone, and be safe.